Today we're here with Lenore Hart and David Poyer, who are novelists and who are members of the Wilkes Creative Writing Program faculty, and the founders and editors of Northampton Press, which is affiliated with Wilkes. It's one of the organizations that we're very proud to have as part of our offerings to students. So, David and Lenore, tell me a little bit about what prompted you two writers to move to the other side of the desk and become publishers.
Well, I think David should probably answer that first because it was your idea initially, and it was slightly different than what it is now.
Well, I guess my idea originally was twofold. I had a lot of projects that were out of print that had come out with major publishers, and I thought still had legs and still had definitely an audience, but were out of print because the print ones would have been too small to make them economic for a Big Five New York publishing house. But I could, on the other hand, make them available as ebooks, but I needed a vehicle to do that. So the press kind of began as a vehicle to put out of print books back into print, as it were. But at the same time, I was noticing that a lot of my students were producing wonderful stuff, and getting no traction at all. They were busting
in a contracting
their
market, yeah, because the market was contracting so badly at that point, the large presses and everything. So it was getting, in other words, basically, it was just getting harder to get published for everybody.
So putting those two things together, after originally doing ebooks of my old properties and starting to do a few ebooks from students and faculty, we branched out into trade paperback. Moved from trade paperback to hardcover books, and just recently have inaugurated the Polyhymnia audiobook line, which is our audiobook line. So we do pretty much cover the gamut now, all the way from world distribution of ebooks, trade paper, case-bound hardcover, regular dust jacket hardcover, audiobooks, and we're looking at what lies downstream from there. So we've been starting small in 2011, expanding like gangbusters.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you maybe didn't expect? I always say that, publishing is a business where anything can go wrong anytime with no warning, unlike, say, teaching, where you kind of have more or less a blueprint. Tell me, a little bit about the challenges that you faced that you maybe didn't expect, even though you were veteran writers.
Well, the first thing I would say is that this is not a challenge so much as just something I learned, which is that it gave me a very interesting perspective from the other side, because how, and I know you've probably done this, how writers are like, oh my God, the editor, what an idiot, what are you talking about? That's wrong. No, it has to stay the same, Well, suddenly I was on the other side and seeing like, oh, so that's what it was like. Yeah, I kind of get it now. I kind of get that. So you get the idea of how it was when you were just, complaining about your editor, that your editor probably had a few complaints too. So I learned that. As for challenges, well, as you can see, we have this really large staff here. I mean, this is it. We have a designer, who's our art director.
Actually, we have three designers.
Now we have three. We started out with one, though, and that was Naya, our daughter, who was a designer for some other presses, and who, were freelances too. So that's how we started out. And then we had to figure out when our book designer also started working at Harvard in another job. And the time, was suddenly, there was not much time. We had to branch out and get, find more people to do the work. So suddenly we had covers and interiors that needed to be designed and turned out, and they just couldn't be done. They would back up. We had to, expand in a way with freelancers. And finding people to help edit. I was teaching, working on a book and stuff, of course, and then also needed to edit several books here. Then that became a problem as well, like the log jam problem, because only one person can only do so many things at one time. And these were things we kind of didn't really, I think, anticipate. because I think that we mainly had thought we were going to be putting some of our older books back in print or in new editions, and they were pretty much good to go. We maybe did a little revising, and then occasionally publish another book, but it ended up with us doing, I don't know, how many books a year? What is the most you think we did in a year? Maybe
I
8.
think the most is around 8 a year.
8, we did 8 one year, you know, and it's 6 to 8 now usually, which doesn't sound huge unless you consider, once again, this is the staff. They also teach, you know, teach at a university, have students, write their own books, and have sometimes other jobs as well, other, you know, writing, editing, ghostwriting, whatever jobs. So, yeah, that's something we learned gradually. It could be a problem at times.
Yeah, I'll talk to two challenges I've noticed. The first one that I sort of anticipated but didn't really realize would be as challenging as it was learning all these different software programs. Because even if I get if I get a CS file in from a designer and I have to make a small change, I make the change. If I have some interior text I need to change, I need to make the change. If I upload, uploading things to ebooks, Overdrive, which is a really, Overdrive is terrible, as you know. All the metadata challenges there. So the software was one. I guess I had to learn 16 different software programs, and I'm still not done learning those. And the second one was addressing saleability. Now, saleability is something that I always aimed for. We were in the black after the first 6 months. We've stayed in the black ever since, although sometimes it's been kind of close. But I did not want to run it as a money loser. Obviously, I have to lose money a little bit up front on each book, but I hope to make it back. So that was, so then I began to think like a publisher, not like a reader, not really what do I want to write or what do I want to see written, but what is going to sell. And that's a different mindset as well. So those are two challenges.
Right. Well, go ahead, Lenore.
Oh, another thing we wanted to do, I don't know how much of a challenge it was, but we wanted this press to be one that, I mean, obviously it's all our money. We don't have, this is a private, I don't know what to call it exactly, a private small boutique, I guess is the word, press, without any backing of any kind except our money. So, not going bankrupt, of course, was an issue too. And we haven't done that, but we didn't want to do that. But at the same time, we wanted to offer writers, some kind of decent recompense for their work. We don't have the money, for instance, to give them, big advances or really much any advances. So what we did instead was to create a royalty plan. And I think it's probably the highest. We give them the highest rate of royalties as far as we know, like in the publishing industry. What was it exactly?
I discussed that individually.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, he discussed it, but I mean, if you looked at our royalty rate for return for them versus like the standard publishing contract, it's much higher, and it does vary a little bit depending if it's their first book or a second book,
Right.
And all that. So he's right. I'm not sure it's going to take, but we do have a royalty rate that is much better, and that's the way, as we make the money, they make more money too. They get that royalty rate at a higher rate. So that's the way we try to reward writers, for all the work they've done, because writing a book, any book, is hard work, so that's what we tried to do. And, that was something we tried to put in place up front. So
we do approach it more from the standpoint of our being writers rather than being financiers or titans of industry.
Yeah, we're not titans.
Well, you started then with books that were already obviously complete and had been copy edited, had been vetted, had been published, and all of that, and that takes out, some of the guesswork. But now you've developed, new projects. Tell me a little about your editorial sensibility, how these projects are vetted and chosen.
Well, we've got a very broad range of interests. I guess you could say, actually, we don't. I mean, with some exceptions, like we don't do big coffee table books. We don't do specialized things like, aircraft spotting books. But I mean, that aside, we're open to pretty much anything. If it's especially fiction, but also nonfiction. We're looking for fiction and nonfiction projects. We occasionally do poetry, but we don't feel like that's really our calling so much. We feel like what we're really trying to do is kind of what our motto says, which is like, you know, good books at affordable prices, or books that people want to read. So we're looking for really well-crafted books that aren't necessarily literary, although they could be, but books that have at least the quality of writing you might expect in a literary work, but also ideally they have some sort of popular appeal, whether it's a genre, like, because we're open to all genres, science fiction, fantasy, a detective story, or even romance. And I'm very, very picky on romance because I don't like cliches. I don't want to see the same thing that's been done a million times. So we're really open to anything as long as it's extremely well written and it's engaging, and we can look at it and see that there is an audience for it, and that we know how we're going to market it. You know, who are we selling this to? Who is it for? If I'm really engaged by it and I think it's a great book, whatever the genre, then I feel confident that I know, you know, it's a book that's going to have an audience and one we can market effectively.
Yeah, speaking to that, a couple of the projects that we've taken on, one was a 80-year-old woman when she came to us. She's 90 now, and we have 4 of her historical romances in print, and they sell very well. And they're beautifully written.
4 in a
Five,
series.
4 in the first series, and then one standalone. They're beautifully written. They take you right back to World War II, aboard a hospital ship in the Pacific and other places.
Mhm.
And she's just great.
And one of our best-selling writers too.
Yeah.
they love her stuff because it's not just a romance, you know, in terms of its genre romance. It also tells history. They're vividly written. They're really well. I mean, maybe she was there even. I'm not sure, but you know, it's like it's got that. You know, it's got the feeling that she must have been there to know all these details about the Navy and the war and the hospital ships and everything. So yeah, I think, and they appeal to a wide range of readers, and not just people looking for romance, although there is a romance involved. It's not just the romance, it's also the history, the characters. They're very character driven. So
yeah, we have quite a wide range of things. Our first hardcover was a nonfiction book on constitutional history.
Yes.
Which sounds really dry,
Yeah.
and in some places it is, but it's told in terms of the stories of the people that are why the Constitution was written as it was. And what I didn't realize was that Madison based many of his constitutional precepts on the history of the Dutch Republic. So we had a Dutchman who came to us with this project, who had gone through Madison's library and gave us the human stories of why we have certain provisions in the Constitution.
Yeah.
So it sounded dry, but it appealed.
Yeah, because there's these great medieval anecdotes about like just ordinary people, you know, and how the laws came to be and how they got translated into our laws too. So it's really fascinating.
So a broad spectrum of things. What won't we take? I have a personal. I don't like things that address violence against women. I have a problem with that. What won't you take?
We don't mean to address it, but you mean, yeah, works that you know, I mean, we do have some, I guess our sensibilities, you know, after what I've explained, exploitative stuff,
Yeah.
They do extend into that. So when I was saying like we don't do airplane books and we wouldn't want to do, you know, something like a slasher novel where there's lots of women who are victims. You know, that's a personal thing. I know that really sells, but we don't want to sell that.
We agree.
So we agree on that that's just really, to us, that's really like, you know, no way, we're not going there. I guess we don't do porn, although I have nothing against it, I guess, you know, it has its place, I'm sure, but we don't really do that. So, you know, those are things we don't do, I guess. I don't know. Is there anything else?
Anything I wouldn't do? Well, things that are just, you know, more of the same. We want something different. And because we're a small press, we can afford to take gambles and roll the dice and take something that a mainstream press might not say, you know, this is not for us because it doesn't have the appeal. Well, we're kind of a niche publisher. We can address niche markets with niche books. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, because you know, that's one of the great things about the publishing process now. I mean, many years ago, I worked in a printing company, a big one that did a lot of big jobs, and they had those big 12-color presses rolling and clanging, you know, and it's incredibly expensive. You know, I mean, banks would pay, like $500,000 to get their, annual reports done and stuff like that. But now we don't have to do that. Now it's basically, a computer push button thing. It still costs money, but it's not exactly a lot of money. So we can take a chance to do whatever we want. Another perk of that, of having your own press and having this much, much more economical printing process, is that you can, if you have a project of your own, you can afford to do it instead of going to another publisher, and then you can do it the way exactly you want. And that's what I did with the anthology that I do about every 2 years, The Night Bazaar. Since I do write short stories, I have a great interest in fairy tales, magical realism, fantasy, edgy fantasy, dark fantasy, not really sword and sorcery stuff.
Creepy stuff,
eerie stuff, I do occasionally publish stories like that, but now I've got this anthology that I do, The Night Bazaar, which is something that I got an idea from once I found out there was a market in Brooklyn called The Night Bazaar, and I thought, oh, what a great title, but I'm sure there's like a million Night Bazaars out there already, and then I went and looked it up, and there was only a hotel in China called The Night Bazaar. Nothing else, no books, nothing. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is a sign, this is great luck. So I trademarked that and then created the anthology, and I got to completely control it myself in terms of an editor for a vision. I created this theme, the whole background for it, the bazaar in which it's partly set. And then I got to go out and ask my friends and colleagues and other people, to contribute stories. And that was the first Night Bazaar, which is set in modern day New York. And we're about to bring out the second one, which is set in 14th century Venice during, this seems timely now, although it didn't when I was choosing it, 14th century Venice during the plague.
Oh my goodness.
That's just, complete coincidence, because we started on the book over 2 years ago. So
right.
It seems more timely now. And, some of the stories are historical, some of them are contemporary, but they're all tied in some way clearly to this bazaar and the main character I created for it. So, but how often would you get to do that if you were approaching another publisher? You just, it's highly unlikely. Mm-hmm. But yet I could do that because of all these things that make it possible to do that.
You guys, of course, and as many people who see this may not know, the reason you're not practicing social distancing is because you guys are married. So,
yes.
So that works out. And you mentioned that you guys are the staff, but you've also had opportunities for students to do internships.
Correct.
And tell us a little bit about what an intern at Northampton House might expect to do.
Well, we do have, let's see, one of the interns we had do, we had one who dove deep into the software and was able to get me up on overdrive, which I appreciated, a lot of help there.
Mm-hmm. That's the library software, in case anyone the interns don't know about that. That's the software that allows libraries and have to buy books that they can then check out to patrons. So.
Yeah, let's see. There was an intern who worked for you recently, I think.
Well, I've had several. I was just talking about the Night Bazaar. One of our interns, Renee Butts, helped me with a number of projects, actually. She ran a writing competition, and she also helped me do publicity for and set up the launch party, which you may remember.
I do remember.
Costumes.
It was quite a night bazaar.
Yeah. It was an actual night bazaar for a lunch party where we had actually vendors with, magical goods, and we had a juggler and all that stuff.
Fortune teller.
Yeah, and a fortune teller, two fortune tellers. And she actually set that up. So, because she was there in Wilkes-Barre, so she, worked on I guess you say the publicity, marketing, launch party end, and also did the competition. I've had other interns who did things like media updates, social media, set up news sites, and then the same interns actually. That's another advantage, I guess, in that I can give a person, unless we have a big project in mind that would be all consuming, I can give an intern different things to do so they can learn different aspects of the publishing industry. So I've had, for example, I had 2 interns once, and they basically did some of the same things, which were each of them read at least one manuscript, critiqued it, and gave a report back to me, on how publishable it was or not. They also did some research into like different kinds of social media. They looked into news sites for reviews, like online book blogs, things like that. They tried to figure out ways to engage readers more through those sources. What else? One of them did a project for you. Michelle did. I can't remember what it was, though.
I'm trying to remember it too.
It was something more online. It had something to do with online searches and stuff. So, I mean, and actually, we're also
search engine optimization.
Search engine optimization, which I can just barely say. So, so there's another. But we would also, and I have done this in the past, we would be open to proposals from the interns. If they have an idea of something they would like to try, then we're very open to that too.
That's great, because as you know, the students tend to come not only with a variety of skills and levels of age and interest and genre, but they also want to penetrate the veil, so to speak,
yes.
and learn new things about publishing. As both you and I and Kaylee Jones, who we know, I mean, we all kind of entered into this as writers without knowing a lot,
right.
So we can appreciate young writers who want to learn this material, and of course it doesn't, there isn't really a book or a way of finding out except by apprenticeship. So offering these apprenticeships is so valuable.
Yeah, I think so. I think also, even if they never work in publishing after this, it's still incredibly valuable for them as writers to understand the process and know what goes on and what to expect when they do publish something themselves.
Right.
Yeah, some of our authors are unrealistic, and they have, I mean, as I did when I began publishing in the 1980s, I had unrealistic expectations, and I had illusions, and I no longer have any illusions. So there are none. A couple of dreams left, but no illusions.
Well, thank you so much, Lenore Hart, David Poyer, Northhampton Press, Northampton House Press, and we wish you continued success.
Thank you, Phil.